because we had a new special driver, a new magic trick, as it were. That magic trick looks like people have decided they can work out how the magic trick was performed, and they're not sure that they're willing to be convinced anymore that the lady really is being sawn in half.
Garfield, thank you. Garfield Reynolds there, our Bloomberg MLive team there. And really sticking with NVIDIA, the company has responded to that Bloomberg report on a U.S. antitrust investigation and saying that, dismissing, of course, that they have been subpoenaed by the DOJ. Let's get to our tech reporter, Annabelle Drewler. She joins us now from Taipei this morning. Belle, what has NVIDIA said?
Well, exactly as you say, they're rejecting the Bloomberg exclusive reporting that we had, essentially that NVIDIA and other companies had been subpoenaed. So what we were saying was that it was a real escalation here, because in the past we'd been reporting on questionnaires that had been sent out to companies, and now they were going to be legally binded to respond. NVIDIA has rejected it for its part, and it's saying that really the reason it has so much clout in the market really comes down to the quality of its products, and that's why it has such a strong customer base, and that's why it has such a strong order log. But of course, the regulatory scrutiny around the company does not seem to be disappearing anytime soon. The real question here is whether they've created an exclusive monopoly of sorts, where they're really making it more difficult for customers to choose other chips or to use NVIDIA and as well other products in the market.
Yeah, Bill, and we were having this conversation yesterday, right? And the concern in markets is not so much is AI not a real thing, it's whether or not we've become over optimistic and some of the valuations have become too stretched. So when we look at a company like NVIDIA, we look at TSMC to see how NVIDIA might be doing, and you've taken that a step further, and you've actually spoken on the ground to TSMC suppliers to get a sense of how the broader industry might look in 5-10 years. And what's the sense you're getting?
Yeah, that's right. Really just trying to understand that NVIDIA story from what's happening here in Taiwan. And we've been speaking to companies across the course of this week, but one of those is Scientech, and it's a major supplier to TSMC. It allows a special type of advanced packaging to take place. This is a new sort of area in the chip domain that's getting a lot of attention right now. But this is a company that has far outpaced the broader Taiwan benchmark. It's one of the best performing chip stocks this year. And I spoke to the CEO about why we have seen such strong numbers and his outlook for AI demand. Take a listen.
We are lucky in this AI industry. We benefit from the equipment that we build, the process that we develop with customers together to enable AI process. So that's why our investors value Scientech as a potential company who can really contribute in this industry.
And what sort of demand are you seeing? What's your outlook for demand for your equipment toward the end of this year, but next year as well?
The growth will be substantial for next few years. The growth rate will be much, much higher than 8%.
Can you give the number?
The equipment that we sold to them probably increase 2 or 3 times a year. It is possible. And so it is also benefit Scientech from their revenue.
Do you see any risk to that outlook?
From my personal perspective, this booming of AI industry just begin. There's a lot of application I do expect will coming out pretty soon. So that's why Jensen Huang, some time ago, he said the overall market of AI will reach 100 trillion at some point in the next probably few years.
We're seeing a lot of Taiwanese companies that are choosing to expand abroad. Do you see any sort of concentration risk from choosing to focus your attentions here?
Of course. Definitely, we will try to, evaluate alternative locations, either for the R&D, for the manufacturing. Internally, this is under our processing.
Speaking more broadly now, what has been really capturing a lot of attention in the chip equipment manufacturer space or chip equipment provider space is the measures that we're seeing applied on Tokyo Electron and ASML and restricting sales of certain equipment to mainland China. That risk of tariffs or being prevented from selling to the Chinese market, is that something that concerns you or Scientech as a business?
My direct answer to you is no, because the equipment that we built are mainly for packaging applications, and the packaging applications is not included in this limitation.
Do you see that risk ever appearing in the future? Is it something that you're looking at closely?
We all know the advanced packaging is becoming more critical every day. Most likely it will happen, but who knows?
All right, great interview there. Our tech reporter Annabelle Jewler is joining us out of Taipei this morning. And coming up, Xi Jinping is set to lay out his blueprint for growing China's relationship with Africa. We're live from Beijing next. This is Bloomberg.
First of all, global trade, which had adverse consequences that we're learning about to this day, still unleashed an enormous amount of gain for humanity. And with the rise of global trade became the rise of information sharing around the world, which rapidly accelerated the trajectory of mankind. I mean, of note, the Chinese, for example, are leaders in solar, they're leaders in EVs, they're leaders in a number of emerging technologies. In a world which is more splintered, we'll see the gains that the Chinese have achieved in these important areas not shared by the Western countries. And conversely, the United States is a clear leader in AI, along with a number of the European countries, and those gains will not be shared with China and the countries in its sphere of influence. So it's a very clear-cut loss for all of humanity when we have the severing of ties between our countries.
On a practical level, is it getting harder to manage the risks you face?
I think that one has to be aware that there are more tail risks that are harder to ultimately manage.
Well, President Xi Jinping is set to lay out his blueprint for growing China's relationship with Africa. Our chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, joins us from Beijing with our next guest. Steve.
Yeah, we're just waiting imminently for that speech at the Great Hall of the People from President Xi Jinping. It'll be very interesting to see what his tone is. This is a hallmark project of Xi Jinping since he took office, essentially to engage with the African nations, yes, through the Belt and Road Initiative, but also to more recently really send a lot of the excess industrial capacity to welcoming Chinese or African nations, no doubt. But again, that has exacerbated some of the trade imbalances between the continent and China. And of course, we've seen debt loads amass in places like Zambia, Ethiopia, Ghana, and at least a dozen more African nations who are said to be in debt distress. It's not all China's fault, but again, the loans going forward are going to be probably dialed back. Let's discuss this more with Eric Olander. He is the editor-in-chief of the China Global South Project. So good to see you, Eric. I've known you for about 33 years. You know this relationship perhaps better than anyone in the world. Tell me, how should the relationship, given the economic downturn here in China and the debt issues in Africa, how must the relationship be adopted for the new realities?
Well, what we're going to see in the Xi speech is really the evolution of the Belt and Road into what they're calling the small is beautiful era. And so this is really in response to some of the debt concerns that you mentioned. We're going to see project sizes in the 100 to 200 million range, focused on environmentally sustainable, focused on debt sustainability, energy, infrastructure. But more importantly, you're going to see Xi really take advantage of the moment that China is going to remain engaged in Africa, where the U.S. and Europe and other major partners have been distracted by wars and the conflicts that are emerging in the South China Sea.
Do you think this relationship that Xi has pinned so much on has worked? I mean, I mentioned about how many of these African nations are indebted. We have a number of different case studies, whether it's in Kenya with a rail link that ends in a field. We have in Nigeria's capital essentially a light rail project that looks abandoned, is not really being used. Are these, from your estimation, isolated cases, or all across the continent do we have failed projects, or perhaps over aggressive planning by the Africans who are already fiscally stressed in their coffers?
No, I think that's a vast mischaracterization of the debt situation. Remember that the Chinese account for only 11% of the African debt. When we look at the situation in Kenya, they're about 8% of the total. Don't measure on the bilateral, because Africans don't borrow that much bilaterally. African governments tend to borrow heavily from their domestic markets, as in the case in Kenya and in Ghana and and certainly in South Africa. And so I think there's a vast overstatement of the role that Chinese debt plays compared to Eurobond and multilateral, which is much, much, much larger in scale and size. In terms of the Abuja light rail that you referenced, by the way, that is up and running now. And in terms of the standard gauge railway, that is a key mission for President William Ruto in Beijing this week, to try to get the extension from Naivasha in the Rift Valley out to Kisumu on the Ugandan border. So this project isn't finished yet, and I think it's too early to kind of say that these are failures.
How do you think the global pursuit of influence within the Global South, in particular with Africa, is paying off for China at the expense of the West and the United States? Some of the deals that are being announced already here is landlocked nations. I think Zambia has renegotiated a deal that Mao Zedong struck back in the 1970s, essentially to complete the rail link out to the sea to the east, I believe. But the United States, to its credit, is also working, I think, with the Democratic Republic of Congo to build a rail link as well to the coast, to the west. Who's winning this influence battle in the African continent? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I mean, this Tazara deal, I think when we look back on FOCAC, is going to be, I think, one of the major highlights of it. So this is the railway that the Chinese built in the 60s. They have $1 billion public-private partnership plan to refurbish it. There was a signing ceremony this week with Xi Jinping and the presidents of Zambia and Tanzania. But this is really a direct response in many respects to the Lobito corridor that the U.S. Helped to finance and to refurbish in Angola. Now, if you are going to ship resources to China to be processed, because remember, the U.S. and Europe do not have the processing facilities, are you going to go via the Atlantic, or are you going to go via the Indian Ocean? And so the fact that the Chinese may build a competitor to the Lobito corridor, if I was in the State Department in the U.S. government, I would start feeling very nervous about this investment that I've made in Angola with the arrival of a refurbished Tazara railway. The competition is real, and it's heating up.
Eric, how measurable is the battle for influence essentially in places like the UN, as we have a number of different hotspots around the world, whether it's the war in Ukraine, the issues with Hamas, obviously you have tankers, super tankers in the Red Sea being attacked by Houthi rebels. You have a number of issues, hotspots. How much does this, forget the $120 billion in not well-performing loans that state policy banks have lent over the years to the African nations, but they've won influence in these multinational organizations, have they not?
Absolutely. And just you want to see this, how it's playing out, take a look at the joint statement between Xi Jinping and Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African and Chinese presidents. They mentioned Gaza by name on multiple occasions, and China praised South Africa for bringing the issue to the International Court of Justice. So this alignment between China and Africa on these issues like Gaza, on colonialism, and on opposition to a lot of the Western-led initiatives in places like Ukraine is very powerful, and in many ways, China has been benefiting enormously from Africa's support.
Eric Olander, we've just scratched the surface. I wish we could go on and on and on. We have to catch up as well. Old times, 33 years now, friends. Eric Olander, editor-in-chief of the China Global South Project. We have more, obviously, coming from Beijing here as we're awaiting the keynote speech, the welcoming speech. A lot of pomp and circumstance happening at the Great Hall of the People. This is Bloomberg.
Our principles, our policies in support of the Palestinian people will never change. Our policy in having a two-state solution will never change, and nothing will compromise it. And as long as we are, having the capability to be helpful, we will do it. We did that between Afghanistan, between Taliban and the US. We did that between different parties in Lebanon, in Sudan, and others. And that's basically the core of our foreign policy. It's been built based on mediation, on trying to help in resolving conflicts between the party. There are countries or people might not like it, but we don't ask everyone to like it, just to understand it.
Names in global leadership are on Bloomberg.
I envisage not only some kind of a bridge towards membership or language linked to the irreversibility of Ukraine's membership in NATO, but also some kind of a broader package of military material, of financial aid. The more we support Ukraine right now, the sooner the war will end.
Nobody covers the top global leaders like Bloomberg Television and Radio. The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close, weekdays at 3 p.m. only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Why does this business model work? Because it's virgin space. It's never been done before, and it'll never be done again. When you step back and you look at something that's been golf through institutions has been